welcome to Simpler Bible, a daily journey to biblical understanding. Well, today, for episode 87, we are going to be talking about David bringing the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem. We're going to start in 1 Chronicles 13 and 15, but we'll end up also in 2 Samuel 6, because those are the two texts that deal with this situation. And so, begin with me, if you would, in 1 Chronicles chapter 13. The ark brought from Kiriath-Jearim. Now David consulted with the commanders of thousands and of hundreds and with every leader, and David said to all the assembly of Israel, "If it seems good to you and to the Lord our God, let us send abroad to our brothers who remain in the lands of Israel, as well as the priests and the Levites in the cities that have pasture lands, that they may be gathered to us, and then let us bring the ark of our God to us, for we did not seek it in the days of Saul." So this is an interesting thing. Remember that Saul was king for about 40 years, and he did not seek any wisdom from the Ark of the Covenant. You might remember that we left the Ark of the Covenant back in 1 Samuel chapter 7 after the Philistines had returned it. The Philistines had been beset by plagues, and they had been beset by tumors and rats, and so the Philistines had returned the Ark of the Covenant to Kiriath-Jearim, and the people of Kiriath-Jearim looked into it, and 70,000, or more likely 50,070 people died there in Kiriath-Jearim, and that's kind of where it's been for a while now. So all the assembly agreed to do so, for the thing was right in the eyes of the people. They said, yeah, look, let's bring the Ark of the Covenant back. Verse 5, so David assembled all of Israel from the Nile of Egypt to Lebo-Hamath to bring the Ark of God from Kiriath-Jearim. And those were the texts that I just referred to about 1 Samuel 6:21, 1 Samuel 1 and 2, the people of Kiriath-Jearim. And David and all of Israel went up to Bala, that is Kiriath-Jearim, that belongs to Judah, to bring up from there the Ark of God, which is called by the name of the Lord who sits enthroned above the cherubim. Remember that the Ark of the Covenant is about 3+ feet long, about 2.5 feet wide and 2.5 feet deep, had a lid on top of it with two cherubim whose wings were spread out. Most people probably picture something from Raiders of the Lost Ark when they picture it, and that's not entirely unfair, I don't suppose. So it says this in verse 7, they carried the Ark of God on a new cart to the house of Abinadab, or from the house of Abinadab, and Uzzah and Ehud were driving the cart. And David and all of Israel were rejoicing with all their might before the Lord, with songs and lyres and harps and tambourines and cymbals and trumpets. When they came to the threshing floor of Gibeon, Uzzah put out his hand to take hold of the ark, for the oxen had stumbled, and the anger of the Lord was kindled against Uzzah, and he struck him down because he put out his hand to the ark, and he died there before God. And David was angry because the Lord had broken out against Uzzah. There's a book called The Holiness of God by R.C. Sproul, and it's one that I read when I was in college, and then 20 years ago, when I first moved to San Angelo, I led a Bible study and watched some people through this Bible study as well. And it's still one of my favorite lines. Whenever I read the story, I can't read this story without thinking about it. So Uzzah and Ehud, or Ahio, or whatever his name are, they're driving these oxen. These oxen have a cart, and on the cart is the Ark of the Covenant. And the oxen stumble, the cart shifts, and Uzzah goes to steady the Ark of the Covenant on the back of this cart so that it doesn't fall into the dirt, and God strikes Uzzah dead for touching the Ark. And the thing that R.C. Sproul says in this, as he's recounting the story that I just love, is he says that Uzzah apparently thought that the ark falling into the dirt, falling into the mud, would contaminate the ark, and yet the dirt doesn't contaminate the ark. Sinful man contaminates the ark, right? And so, like, the dirt was more holy than Uzzah if he had just let it fall. But the other thing about this, and we'll get into this in a little bit, I'll remind you of this, is that they weren't allowed to touch the Ark of the Covenant. I'm almost there anyway, so I'll just keep going, and I'll get to that point in just a second. So look at verse 11. Of chapter 13 here. And it says, and David was angry because the Lord had broken out against Uzzah, and that place is called Perez Uzzah to this day. David was afraid of God that day, and he said, how can I bring the ark of God home to me? So David did not take the ark home into the city of David, but took it aside into the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite. And the ark of God remained in the household of Obed-Edom for 3 months, and the Lord blessed the household of Obed-Edom and all that he had. David built for himself houses in the city of David, and prepared a place for the ark of God. So he prepares a place, prepares a tent. What has happened to the tent of meeting at this point? We don't know. The ark clearly hasn't been in the tent of meeting for a long time. Saul killed all the priests at Nob. There's the priesthood and the tent of meeting and the Ark of the Covenant. All of that has kind of fallen into disreputation. So David builds a house and he builds a tent as a place for the Ark of the Covenant to land when they get it. And then verse 2 of of 1 Chronicles 15 says, David said that no one but the Levites may carry the ark of the God, for the Lord has chosen them to carry the ark of God and to minister before him forever. Now, this is interesting. Back in Exodus 25, we see that one of the things, the components of the Ark of the Covenant was that it had 30-foot long poles so that the Levites, specifically the Kohathites of the Levite clan, were carrying the Ark of the Covenant on their shoulders. So there was a distance between them. You might even remember over in Joshua chapter 4 that when the people were crossing into the promised land and Joshua was leading them, they had to be like 3,000 cubits away from the Ark of the Covenant. Sorry, 2,000 cubits, 3,000 feet, something like that, away from the Ark of the Covenant. The people weren't even allowed to pass close to it. The Bible goes on to say in Exodus 35 and Exodus 37 that no one was allowed to touch the Ark of the Covenant, only the high priest, and that only once a year, and no one was allowed to look on it. So David and all the assembly who have the Ark of the Covenant on the cart being dragged by these oxen, the entire assembly should have been killed. Like, God's rule was you can't even look on it lest you die, because before they would move it, what would happen is the Kohathites would come in and they would cover it, or the priest, the high priest would come in and he'd cover the Ark of the Covenant, and then the Kohathites would carry it on their shoulders. So even though they're carrying it, they're not touching the Ark, remember 30-foot poles, but they're also not even allowed to see it. The high priest would have covered it before they moved it. So the fact that God didn't strike down David, didn't strike down the entire assembly and all the leaders of the people was pretty gracious. Only Uzzah dies, and all of them could have died because you're not supposed to touch it, you're not supposed to look at it, okay? So David assembles all of Israel in Jerusalem. Oh, here's the other thing that's interesting. David says the Levites are the only ones who are allowed to carry it. And he previously put it on an ox cart. So what that tells us is David didn't know the law. David didn't know the rules. The first time they go to move it, he didn't know the rules. The law of Moses by this point, David is king, the law of Moses by this point has also kind of fallen off the grid, off the radar. People are not observing it. King Saul was not observing it. David didn't know it. So something shifts between the first time he tries to move the ark and the second time he moves the ark, because the second time David goes, look, only the Levites are allowed to carry it. So now David has that understanding and that knowledge. So he gets all the people together. Continue with me in 1 Chronicles 15:11. So David summoned the priest Zadok and Abiathar and the Levites, and he gathers them together. And there's one of these Levites is a guy named Joel. Joel is the son of Samuel, and we read about him back in 1 Samuel 8, and we recognize that Samuel's sons, Joel and his other son, they took bribes. They weren't very good guys. And so that's why the people say, we want somebody else to lead us. And so Joel and the descendants of Joel are still serving in the tent of meeting and still serving around the things of God. Verse 12 says, and David said to them, you are the heads of the fathers' houses of the Levites. Consecrate yourself and your brothers so that you may bring up the ark of the Lord, of the God of Israel, to the place that I have prepared for it. Because you did not carry it the first time, the Lord our God broke out against us, because we did not seek him according to the rule. So David is acknowledging, look, the first time we didn't do it correctly because I didn't know what we were supposed to do. Verse 14, so the priests and the Levites consecrated themselves, sanctified themselves, set apart themselves as holy, and they brought up the ark of the Lord, the God of Israel. The Levites carried the ark of God on their shoulders with the poles, as Moses had commanded according to the word of the Lord. David also commanded all the chiefs of the Levites to appoint their brothers as singers who would play loudly on musical instruments, on harps and lyres and cymbals, and with sounds of joy. So the Levites appointed Heman, the son of Joel, and that's Heman, the son of Joel, the son of Samuel. And we know that from the genealogy recorded for us in 1 Chronicles 6:33. And so Samuel's son, and specifically Samuel's grandson, are still doing work. And then we have Heman and Asaph, who are going to be key in proclaiming songs and proclaiming the worth of God. And there's actually three guys. There's Heman, Asaph, and Ethan. And Ethan will be mentioned later when we talk about King Solomon, because Solomon's wiser than Ethan. So all of these guys are appointed to proclaim and to sing and to play musical instruments and to declare the worth and the beauty of God. Asaph, for example, we'll talk about that here a little bit later, but Asaph and it will write several of the Psalms, 12 of them, I think, but I'll give you that, I think, tomorrow. So says this in verse 25, David and the elders of Israel and the commanders of the thousands went up to bring up the ark of the covenant of the Lord from the house of Obed-Edom with rejoicing. And because God helped the Levites who were carrying the ark of the covenant, they sacrificed 7 bulls and 7 rams. David was clothed with a robe of fine linen also as were the Levites who were carrying the ark, and the singers and the leaders of the music. David wore a linen ephod. So all of Israel brought up the ark of covenant of the Lord with shouting, with the sound of horn, trumpet, cymbals, and made loud music on harps and lyres. Again, remember, none of them should be even beholding this. And as the ark of the covenant of the Lord came to the city of David, Michal, that's David's wife, the youngest daughter of Saul, Michal, the daughter of Saul, looked out the window and saw King David dancing and rejoicing, and she despised him in her heart. Now let's look at the same story, but in 2 Samuel 6, and there's a few other things details that maybe we didn't get in the Chronicles version. And it says this: David again gathered all the chosen men of Israel, 30,000, and David went with all the people with him to bring up from there the ark of God, which is called by the name of the Lord of hosts, who sits enthroned on the cherubim. And it says this, verse 5, David and all the house of Israel were making merry before the Lord with songs and lyres and harps and tambourines and castanets and cymbals. And when they came to the threshing floor, Uzzah put out his hand of the ark to the ark of God and took hold of it, for the oxen stumbled. And the anger of the Lord was kindled against Uzzah, and God struck him down there because of his error, and he died beside the ark. David again mad at God. Now, the difference in Chronicles, it's 2 different chapters. It gives us a lot more detail. In Samuel, it's all kind of compressed into 1 chapter, and it's a little bit shorter. So David is afraid, it says in verse 9, David was afraid of the Lord that day and said, how can the ark of the Lord come before me? And so David was not willing to take the ark of the Lord into the city of David, but he took it aside instead to the house of Obed-Edom, and it remained there for 3 months. And then it says in verse 12, and it was told King David, the Lord has blessed the house of Obed-Edom and all that belonged to him because of the ark of God. So David went and brought the ark of God up from the house of Obed-Edom to the city of David with rejoicing. And look at verse 13. And when those who bore the ark of the Lord had gone 6 steps, he sacrificed an oxen and a fattened animal. So I want you to think about this for a minute. We know from the parallel text in Chronicles that David now knows that the Levites are supposed to carry it, and they're moving it from one city to another. And every time they go 6 steps, he sacrifices an animal. 6 steps. You're talking about, like I have long legs, so you're talking about 6 yards, 18 feet maybe, right? Every 18 feet, they're sacrificing an animal on their journey back to Jerusalem. David is like, look, the Levites are going to carry this, and we're going to make sure that we are offering sacrifices to God the whole way so that no one else dies. And it's just when you put those 2 pieces together from Chronicles and Samuel, like David is like, man, we're not going to make any errors this time. And then it says in verses 14 and 15, David danced before the Lord with all of his might, and David was wearing a linen ephod. Some people say David was naked. The text never says that. So David and all of his house of Israel brought up the ark of the Lord with shouting and with the sound of the horn. And so David is doing all these offerings, he's dancing, and then it says this, in verse 20, David returned to bless his household, but Michal, the daughter of Saul, came out to meet David and said, how the king of Israel has honored himself today, uncovering himself today before the eyes of the servants and the female servants, as a vulgar fellow does, shamelessly uncovering himself. So I think that's where some people get the idea that he was maybe naked, but he's wearing a linen ephod. It's the undergarment. He's wearing his undergarments. And David said to Michal, it was before the Lord who chose me above your father and above all of his house to appoint me as prince over Israel and the people of the Lord, and I will make merry before the Lord. So David isn't taking any of this off of Michal, and he says, look, he goes, I was dancing before God who chose me over your father to be king. And he says in verse 22, I will make myself yet more contemptible, yet more undignified than this. I will be abased in your eyes, but by the female servants of whom you have spoken, by them I will be held in honor, or I will be highly esteemed. And Michal, the daughter of Saul, had no children to the day of her death. And so there's this, David is bringing the ark. In the next section, look, what are we reading tomorrow? Tomorrow, let's see, we're going to be in 1 Chronicles 16 and 17 and 2 Samuel 7. And David is going to be before the ark of the Lord. He's going to be talking to God and praying. And you're like, what the heck, man? Because he's not supposed to be doing that. It just shows that David didn't really know the law of Moses. You might not remember this. We just covered it in passing. Moses says in Deuteronomy 17, when you anoint a king for yourself, make sure that he writes down a copy of the law for himself and that he reads it every day so that he will know what he ought to do. That was not something that Saul practiced. It's not something that up to this point David has practiced. And so David is seeking to serve the Lord, but he is not doing so according to the things of the law. He's still missing that. But tomorrow, episode 88, read ahead, 1 Chronicles 16, 1 Chronicles 17, and 2 Samuel 7, and I will see you then. Have a good day. Thank you so much for journeying with us today at Simpler Bible. Together, you and I have looked at another passage of Scripture and come to know the Bible a little bit better and enjoy God more fully. This video, along with all of our videos, can be found at simplerbible.com, where you can enjoy our Through the Bible in a Year course. You can also enjoy a wealth of resources, blog posts that take you a little bit deeper into the text, a Bible study format that you can use with your small groups or your family, and we're creating new content all the time, all with the commitment to help us be people who know and enjoy God more fully. Thank you so much for being part of it, and we can't wait to see you next time.